I titled today's mind map, A Particular Train of Thought Persisted Upon. Now this was inspired by a quote from James Allen's As a Man Thinketh, in which he states that circumstances grow out of thought every man knows who has for any length of time practiced self-control and self-purification. For he will have noticed that the alteration in his circumstances has been in exact ratio with his altered mental condition. So true is this that when a man earnestly applies himself to remedy the defects in his character and makes swift and marked progress, he passes rapidly through a succession of vicissitudes. Now, in 2004, I read the book Think and Grow Rich. And this book started a journey for me, introduced me to these books, As a Man Thinketh, The Kybalion. And there was one word in the book that stood out for me, that sent me down this pathway of understanding the process of mental alchemy, which I believe this is what James Allen was referring to, so let's discuss it. And the word is transmutation. Now, Napoleon Hill brought it up in the context of sexual transmutation, the working of one energy, which is usually expressed physically, and to be able to work with it, not suppress it or repress it, but allow it to express in a creative endeavor. Now, the word transmutation I found to be very fascinating, so I went and looked it up. And I started to come across information regarding mental alchemy. The journey introduced me to the book The Alchemist, which was an interesting story of what we go through, the spiritual alchemy process, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. It also helped me make sense of my own journey to realizing my vision, because when I read Think and Grow Rich, I was in $50,000 debt. And that book helped me get out of debt, and then I also bought my first house by applying the principles in the book, allowed me to rise up in corporate and then bring myself into an interesting fork in the road. Do I want to move into management, or do I want to leave and start my own business, which was the path that I chose in 2009. So all throughout my life, the information that I had learned from mental alchemy continues to play a role in bringing forth vision after vision, success after success. And so thus I gladly so want to share what I have learned and also what has been inspired by the ancient alchemists, including this word transmutation. Now, let's look at this word as defined in the Kybalion. It states, transmutation is a term usually employed to designate the ancient art of the transmutation of metals, particularly of the base metals, into gold. The word transmute means to change from one nature, form, or substance into another, to transform. And accordingly, mental transmutation means the art of changing and transforming mental states, forms, and conditions into others. So you may see that mental transmutation is the art of mental chemistry. If you like the term, a form of practical mystic psychology. Now, what I realized is that on the journey to each one of those visions realized, I was going through this spiritual alchemy process, which is one of the reasons why I encourage having a goal, a vision, committing to the goal and seeing it all the way to completion. Not only do you achieve, but you also go through the purification of the mind, in which you realize higher degrees of potential. You develop a greater relationship with yourself. You understand the nuances and various aspects of the world within, the infinite world within. You find more creative ideas, inspirations. You reconcile certain conflicting thinking. And you also go through the internal, what is known as the marriage of the red king and the white queen in alchemy. Now, ever since I discovered the word transmutation, I've been fascinated by it. And I've been studying mental alchemy since 2004, since Think and Grow Rich. And I study it every day. It introduced me to the Kybalion. The Kybalion introduced me to many other ancient alchemical texts. I looked at various interpretations of the Emerald Tablets, the Corpus Hermeticum, and other what would seem on the surface as confusing alchemical texts, such as the Summa Perfectiones. And I studied alchemical art, and I continue to do so, because I realized that the ancient alchemists, they really knew what they were talking about. And I believe we can all benefit from connecting back to the origins of where personal development information comes from. Now, let's look at these 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. Now, we can also, if you want to, study this stuff. We can relate this over to the 7 chakras, to the 7 visible planets, and so forth. You'll see the connectivity and relatability to many different philosophies and ways of being. And I like to work with it through the spiritual alchemy process because I find for me it makes a lot of sense. So let's go through this. And I've done a couple discussions on the spiritual alchemy process. I want to share some different distinction, nuances, because I realize that this is always happening. It's happening anytime I commit to a goal and go through the journey to see it into reality, vision realized. And it happens with every goal that I find to be challenging. So I like to pick goals that are challenging. They somehow bring forth self-doubt, indecision, and so forth. I want those thinking patterns brought to the surface. And for me, what I find is a nice goal or vision to stimulate these thinking patterns that are buried perhaps in my unconscious. I want them stimulated and brought to the surface. And the way to do it is to commit to a goal. This is the way that I do it. And, although we might have been taught many different things of how we should be and how we should do things, I always encourage each person to discover within themselves what is it that they truly desire to experience. Now, throughout the journey, each time we bring a goal into realization, we understand this process even more. So here's the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. On the first step, we got calcination. Now, this is usually the start of the journey. A person is inspired to go in a certain direction. They have a desire, and as a result of having this desire, it stimulates a vision, something that they desire to experience in life. Could be a business goal, could be a personal goal, it could be whatever goal. I like to honor and encourage these desires because, as I had found in my life, not only was I able to achieve those things, but who I became and I continue to become on the journey is someone that I truly am. I feel more like myself, like how I truly am. There were clues of how I really was in childhood, although now I encourage it more so by simply committing to what I desire. Now, this starts the process of bringing to the surface certain thinking patterns in relation to fear, self-doubt, and so forth. And they are revealed in the circumstances and outer aspects of our life. How we relate to environment, how we relate to our day-to-day experiences, how we relate to people, and all of those experiences are valuable. They hold key insights as to what's going on within ourselves. Number 2, dissolution. So this is where inaccurate thinking patterns are brought to the surface. We start to build a relationship with our subconscious mind. Now, if you're a student of my subconscious mind program, which is really a result of the 18 plus years that I've been working with this information put into a process which is relatable but expanded upon the spiritual alchemy process, what I had learned from the Emerald Tablets, the Corpus Hermeticum, and there are many different ways of saying the same thing, and we always aim to find our own individualized way of doing it, and so I created that program. And if you want to be a part of that program, I have a link in the description to that. One of the things that I had mentioned in the program is I see this as building a relationship with my subconscious mind. See, I want to understand what's going on within me. I want to be able to look at life, what is being presented to me, the people, the environments, the circumstances, and understand the source in relation to my thinking patterns within myself. Now, this was a lot more challenging in the earlier goals, the earlier stages of the journey, because I wanted to ignore those things and just go straight to the destination. And while I produced the results, I realized that those very same thinking patterns would play out again and again in relationships, friendships, behaviors, you name it. It would show up some shape or form. And it was spawned from what was going on within myself. That is why now I value the journey as much as I value the destination. So I see the journey, I know I say this a lot in my videos, as a spiritual alchemy process. I value it. Now, thinking and feeling, what ends up happening is we reconcile. In alchemy, this is one of the important aspects of the symbolic marriage of the red king and the white queen within. The harmony of thinking and feeling. Now, we talked about this to a certain degree in our Neville Goddard discussion. I'll put a link in the description to it. Think feelingly. And so, accurate thinking, intuitive feeling, connect as one. This is what starts to happen on this journey. So as inaccurate thinking patterns are brought to the surface based on evaluation of reactivity to the different experiences in our life, we then discover what we would like to make peace with within ourselves. It could be how a person responds in business during a sales presentation. Maybe we dislike ourselves, or so we think we do, after we experience what we call a rejection, rather than seeing it as an opportunity for optimization. If a person sees themselves that way and just ignores it and continues to do sales call after sales call, they might find themselves spinning the wheels and making this far more complex and convoluted than it has to be, when there is a great opportunity to write that down and make peace with it via the subconscious mind work. Step number 3, the separation. Seemingly conflicting paradoxes are revealed by inner conflict to bring into reconciliation. Frustration, which was once projected outward into environment, people, circumstances, thus further revealing what is within ourselves, is understood based on certain thinking patterns, belief systems, ideologies, ways of looking at ourselves in relation to people, environment, circumstance, information. And we go on the journey of reconciling within. We become, you could say, more of our own best friend. We start to realize that we are the source within of the phenomena of these experiences, and we change how we relate, and the experiences change. Now, as I'm communicating about this, recognize that this is true for whatever goal, for whatever vision. We may not experience all these things, but perhaps some of these things would show up. Usually, we find this to be the case with goals that are, let's say, unbelievable in the beginning. A person does not believe that they're going to get there, but they know in their heart that they want to commit to this goal, or a goal that they find extremely challenging. But they know in their heart that by committing to this goal, they're not only going to achieve it some way, somehow, or maybe they doubt it to a large degree, but they really want it. And they also know that there's something that's going to happen as a result of achieving the goal. A lot of times they change. Or we could say they become how they really are. They have a greater degree of understanding, wisdom, compassion towards themselves. They understand a deeper degree the meaning of love. Now, seemingly conflicting paradoxes and ideologies and ways of thinking, this person said that and this person said this, and all these things are tracked back to the conflict within our own mind. And we find our own distinct ways of reconciling it within. As a result, we begin to trust ourselves, listen to ourselves, and then we go into more of a conjunction phase. Now you'll find relatability here with the 7 stages of the spiritual alchemy process to the 7 visible planets, as well as the 7 chakras. So in conjunction, acceptance of ratios, internal harmony. This is also a higher degree of relatability, of understanding, experiential level, harmonizing the energies within, the marriage of the red king and the white queen. True meaning of oneness is deeply understood and felt. Internal harmony, acceptance of ratios. Let's talk about this. I'm going to give an example of my entrepreneurial journey, which allowed me to then move into consulting and help others also find this ratio. Person says, should I do this? Should I quit my job and start a business? I say the answer is it depends. Perhaps you would leave your job and start a business, or you would keep your job and build a business on the side and then eventually transition into. So you could leave your job, you could stay in your job, or you could do both, and it could be a ratio. What resonates with you? So they might try it. They might say, look, I find that maybe I'm going to try it for 5 or 6 months. I'm going to stay with the job that I'm working in right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dedicate 2 hours Monday to Friday at the end of the day to work on my business and see how it goes. I'm going to run this for 6 months, and then I'll see what shows up after that. So rather than thinking one way is better than the other, they find a ratio that works for them. Now, some individuals, for them, it's better to leave the job and start a business. For some individuals, it's better to stay in the job, save up a certain amount of money, and then leave it, and then start a business. Or for some individuals, it's better to actually do both at the same time. Now, I worked 10 years in corporate before I left and started my business, and everything that I learned in corporate, which was also part of a spiritual alchemy process, when I look at it from a spiritual lens, was helpful and beneficial and contributed to my IT business success. And everything I learned from there contributed over to my consulting success. And everything I learned in there contributed to me building this YouTube channel. And everything that I learned here contributes to other areas of my life. So the answer is not necessarily one way or another. It could be a combination, but for some people, it might be. For example, I did the 10 years in corporate, and then what ended up happening was I decided I was going to do some side business ventures, taking more of a hybrid approach. 80% of my time in corporate, 20% of my time working hours, let's say, on my business venture. And I did that for a period of time, but I found that I wasn't able to sustain that. I found it to be challenging. And having tried it out, I brought myself to an earnest conclusion, and I accepted that it was time for me to move on. So, acceptance of ratios, internal harmony. The same is to be said about thinking and feeling. Now, when one has purified the mind to a large degree, they experience the heart and mind coherence, and they're able to maintain it for, we could say, longer durations, or maintain it to the point of autotelic, so one with, and that brings us into coagulation, which we'll talk about in a moment, in which they think as needed. They don't overthink. They feel, and they understand what the feeling means, and intuition. So they're able to think as needed. So for example, in business, another example, person may show up and say, what's the process we need to take here when it comes to building this business on the revenue side? Should I go into social media? Should I go into paid advertising? Should I go offline and go into referrals? So I start to have a conversation with them. I say, listen, what do you really want to do? What feels resonant with you? If all of these pathways worked for you, which one would actually bring forth the highest degree of joy, bliss? And perhaps they've never asked that question before because they're only thinking of it from one side of the equation. They may be thinking about it more on the side of what makes the money. And they can benefit from harmonizing it to how they feel, the heart and mind coherence. So then a person, and I remember this conversation, I've had it a number of times, person says, I just really love connecting with people in my local community. And they end up actually knowing a lot of people in their local community. And they get invited to all the events and the trade shows and different activities that occur in their community. And upon evaluation, we find that their ideal prospects are in those locations. And so I asked the question, why did you feel conflict about this? And then they may say, well, I saw some ads and there was some information giving to me says it was better to market on Instagram or to do it this other way. And I said, look, there are many ways to get to the destination. You want to find your way. When I had built my IT business, for example, I ensured, because working with the information and Think and Grow Rich and going through the journey of purification of the mind, which happened and contributed a lot during my 10 years in corporate, the thing that I realized was, you know what, some way, somehow I was going to get there. And I got a hunch one day to message someone on Facebook. And he actually ran this entrepreneur meetup group in Toronto. Now, there was many individuals running Facebook groups and online groups, but I felt compelled to reach out to him. So I reached out to him. And then what ends up happening was we met up for coffee. We worked a referral deal. I'll refer business to him. He was building these websites, and they were niche websites. And I was doing IT services. So he introduces me to one client a few weeks later, who introduces me to their accountant, and their accountant introduces me to so much business, and their referrals introduced me to other referrals, and I started to build a network of relationships in Toronto. And at the peak, I had 50 clients and had a few contractors helping me, and then again, I ended up in a fork in the road. Do I want to continue to grow this business? But I lost interest. I no longer wanted to do it, and I wanted to do something else, so I started to transition away from that. I've told this story many times. But this is because we accept that there are many ways of doing things. We want to connect to our intuition at what intuitively feels resonant. And this is facilitated a lot easier once we make peace with certain inaccurate thinking patterns that the subconscious mind brings to the surface, which is revealed in our circumstances, environments, etc. Make peace with them. Change our thinking patterns around. Do the subconscious mind work. Now, this is where a person starts to feel more oneness, connectivity, and they also then further travel along. Again, this happens for me again and again on every different goal or vision that I set that I find to be inspiring but also challenging at the same time. I notice myself going through these processes because different things are brought to the surface. So that's why I value the journey and the destination, because I'm achieving goals, plus I'm going through this journey. I'm seeing them as one. I don't see one better than the other. I value both. So fermentation can be broken up into two parts, the putrefaction and the spiritization. So think of fermentation in regards to winemaking or beer or something like that. Putrefaction, old elements from our unconscious and conscious minds rot and decompose. So essentially thinking patterns that are inaccurate, that used to be very dominant, which used to bring forth a lot of reactivity, which used to cause certain experiences in our life, seem to fade away. We're noticing less and less and less of those occurrences. Then we experience spiritization. Here's where we listen to, as a result of that overthinking starting to exclude itself out of our consciousness, we notice that we start to listen to the clarity and the vividness of our intuition and inner voice, which is a harmony of the thinking and feeling. There's a lot more of internal calm. We know what we want and what we don't want. So this is where a person gets even more clarity in their lives. So one of the benefits of picking a goal and seeing it all the way to completion, staying on this journey, valuing the different aspects on this journey, is we get a higher degree of clarity. For example, in the earlier stages, I just wanted to make money. And when I read Think and Grow Rich, I just wanted to get out of $50,000 debt. Then I just wanted to make a certain amount of money in corporate. Then I just wanted to leave a business so I could make a certain amount of money. And every time I achieved any of those goals, I added some more criteria, such as not only do I want to make money, but I want to do it by doing things that I really love to do. Not only do I now want to do things that I really love to do and make money, I also want to inspire others to do the same. I want to do it from a place of flow. I want to do it with X, Y, Z criteria. A person starts to develop an even higher palette of nuanced distinction of what they look for. You could say they develop a palette for success. They don't just want that end result or that relationship, but they want it with a certain criteria. And so then the person commits to the next goal, and this journey continues again and again and again. And then what ends up happening is a person enjoys the journey of going through these experiences and the purification of the mind, revealing this inaccurate thinking patterns, which had been deeply embedded, let's say, in the self-image, in the subconscious mind. They release from these inaccurate thinking patterns, which aren't true for them. Now, when I say accurate or inaccurate, it's up to you to go within yourself and ask yourself what that means in relation to your goal and your visions and so forth. So as the person releases from that, they achieve the result from the place of flow. And then after they achieve the destination or they get to that end result, they get even more nuanced in their palette for what success looks like. And they, a lot of times, find great joy in helping others also achieve success. This is something that I have spoken to many about, including during my years of building relationship with the different seniors when I was in corporate. I noticed that the higher level executives would light up every single time I would go into their office and ask them about different challenges that I was having, because they had gone through the experiences and they found great joy in helping another person see things from a different perspective, their own experiences, through their own internal reconciliation, or we could say spiritual alchemy process, although they might not have called it that. We are referring to it at, this is how we see it here. This is how I see it. And we find relatability to here in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, the magic elixir. They give us a different perspective, a different way of looking at the challenge. And as a result, it shifts slightly, perhaps, our mental attitude, and then the situation changes, because we recognize this. All change happens in consciousness first. We change it within, and body is an expression of mind. Behaviors are an expression of mind. Reality is an expression of mind. And so if there is, and let's go back to the quote here, the circumstances grow out of thought, every man who knows who has gone for any length of time practice self-control. So the self-control really is being present to the different experiences on the day-to-day journey and value them as teachers. And the self-purification really is making peace with certain thinking patterns at a subconscious level, thus altering the circumstances and conditions, as he says, in the exact ratio with his altered mental condition. And the defects of character can be looked at as following as we go up to the higher levels. And we'll see this. We were simply identifying with certain thinking patterns in which we were assuming them to be how we really are. The reality is we are not those thinking patterns. The thinking patterns that are in harmony and resonant with, we gladly allow ourselves to identify with. And then what ends up happening is we recognize that we, at the essence, are not defect. At the essence, divinely pure. We'll talk about this in a moment when we get to coagulation. Distillation. So when a person gets to step 6 here, and again, this happens again and again and again, and maybe some journeys, and what I've also experienced is some journeys, there's a higher degree of magnitude to what's brought to the surface and the reconciliation going on. So depending on what goal or vision you have, you'll find a relationship with the degree of what's brought to the surface of unconscious programming, thinking patterns and so forth, beliefs, ideologies. Now, distillation. This is where a person starts to live out their inner realizations. They actually honor and listen to their intuition and prioritize it, allowing them to become more of this. We could say this is how the self-image gets reformed again, or more accurately put, we become truly how we genuinely want to be. Finding love and flow in different areas of life, this becomes common. And also less reactivity and more proactivity in different areas of our life, or in different levels, you could say. For example, a person starts out in a company, they're at an entry-level position. Maybe they have a lot of reactivity. As they go through this journey and value this journey, they rise up to higher positions, higher responsibilities, greater skill is cultivated. They're able to bring forth a higher degree of results for the organization. And they also notice they have less reactivity or no reactivity and more proactivity in relation to the things that they were once reactive to. Perhaps if there was a conflict with a team member, they used to have a fight or flight response. But now what they're finding is that they're encouraging the conversation. They're enjoying the dialogue. And while the dialogue or the conversation might be a little tense, they remain in the conversation because they value the journey. And they realize that this has to do with their own internal programming. And they're able to bring it to the surface and make peace with it in the moment, real time, or upon reflection at the end of the day, end of the week. They observe the thinking patterns and they do the subconscious mind work to make peace with this. And then we go into coagulation. So this is where a person has a higher degree of relationship between mind and matter, harmonious relationship, one with the divine. Inner world and outer world are not seen as different, but reflections of one another, oneness. Now, the important thing about this phase is it's experiential. It's felt. With some people, they don't have the desire to, or they haven't developed the ability to put it into words. Some might even start to express it in very poetic ways. It may sound very esoteric, the way they speak. That's because what they're really describing is something that is from a very deep place. And so now when I reflect back on the many mentors that I've had in my life, and they used to say things to me that you could say were too esoteric for me at that time, or I disregarded it, I now understand it to a deeper degree. I value it. And this goes back to even the things that I heard from my family members when I was growing up. Some very simple advice, some perspectives on life, and some interesting ideas, and even the most complex things that they would say now contain a higher degree of understanding. And through the process of mental transmutation, as we relate it over to Kybalion, it's easier to shift into different states of mind. They can recognize also that they're dwelling in a certain state of mind and be able to switch the state of mind real time. They find themselves less identified with certain thinking patterns that seem to cause a reactivity to circumstances, environmental conditions, people, etc. So I trust you found this to be helpful. Again, another discussion in relation to the spiritual alchemy process, which I continuously like to revisit again and again and again, from not only just a theoretical perspective, so I could share this with you, but also experiential, because I find that I understand it even more so with every goal that I commit to and see into completion. And I trust you'll value it and do the same as well. So let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I realize that I value the journey to the destination because my desires and what I desire to experience is an embodiment of who I destine myself to be. Through the process, I value the thinking patterns, the circumstances, the information, the reactivity, the fears, the indecision, the self-doubt, as opportunities to reconcile within myself, make peace with, and allow myself to be then further who I really am. Through this spiritual alchemy journey, I find a higher degree of internal harmony, acceptance of ratios, understanding of the principle of polarity, and thus I'm able to consciously polarize myself to that which is in harmony and in contribution to my vision, finding myself automatically expressing in a behavioral level that is from a place of flow, bringing forth a higher degree of proactivity and allowing myself to be one with, autotelic, with my vision and how I truly desire to be. I'm able to see clearly how the outer reflects the inner, and I'm able to understand the meaning that is being assigned, the thinking patterns, the beliefs and interpretations, as well as feel the intuitive meaning and connection, bringing forth a higher degree of heart-mind coherence on my journey to realizing my visions.